oxeye daisy here. We're starting in group 2 in the Asteraceae. The first question here is receptacle palliate or bristly throughout, or only towards the middle in one species. Pappus of scales or awns, or very short chaffy bristles, or none. In order to answer this question, we're going to go ahead and dissect this flower, or this inflorescence. I almost always dissect Asteraceae inflorescences this way first, so that I can get a clear view of that receptacle. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to clear away a bunch of the disc flowers. You see them all coming off individually there, just shooting off each one of those, a little tiny flower of its own. Make sure to look at those with a 10x hand lens. And clearing these off so I can really see the texture of the receptacle that's left behind. And what I want to do with that receptacle is really get a close look at it. So I'm going to use my magnifying lens here, and we're going to take a close look at that receptacle. So the receptacle can have all sorts of different kinds of textures. It could have scales, it could have, like little papery, kind of chafy, plasticky looking bracts coming up, or it can be naked and basically, essentially smooth, which is kind of what this receptacle looks like. You see a lot left over sometimes after I clear the flowers away, but we're really looking for that base, the base of the receptacle there, which is the portion nearest the edge of the frame here. And then you can see those individual flowers up close through the hand lens too. Okay, so in our choices here, of course, we've made a mess and really illustrated how many little disc flowers are present here. We got to say the receptacle is palliate or bristly throughout, a pappus of scales or awns. Okay, so what's a pappus? The pappus will be at the base of the flower itself. And sometimes in Hitchcock you can see a good example of this in the illustrations, because the illustrations can really nicely illustrate what's happening with the individual flowers. In this case, we don't have a good illustration exactly nearby, but there'll be other ones in other parts of the key. So let's move to those to give you an example after we zoom in really quick again on these flowers we were just looking at. So again, I'm going to zoom in with my hand lens really quickly and look at those individual flowers. Now we see a corolla for each of these individual flowers, but what you might be curious about is what happened to the sepals. Well, the sepals are what we call the pappus. And so often in Asteraceae, those sepals will be modified into a series of hairs. In this case, we're just not seeing much of a pappus at all. Let me illustrate with some other illustrations from the book here, because there are some nice examples just on the very first page. Here's an example of a ligulate flower on the margin. Here's an example of a ligulate flower with a pappus. And it looks like these hairs that come up at the base of the corolla, and then our ovary down here. So ovary, corolla, pappus, which is the modified calyx. Here we have ovary, corolla, pappus. And the nature of that can be really diagnostic for different plant species. You'll see that there's all sorts of different structures that that pappus can be represented by. It can be just a crown-like margin. It can be these kind of spiky or awn-like looking things. It can be hairs. It can be branched hairs. So we have all sorts of different options. This is all just to get us through group 2 and to understand this second couplet. Or this first couplet. Receptacle palliate to bristly throughout. We don't like that. We just looked at our receptacle and it was pretty smooth. Pappus of scales or awns, or very short chaffy bristles, or none. We don't like that. When we zoomed in on our individual flowers here, we actually found that we didn't seem to have much of a pappus at all. It looked like it was almost just totally absent. And we'll look a little closer here in a second. So, because of that, we get to go all the way to group 1B, receptacle naked or with a row of palea between the ray and disc flowers, between the ray and disc flowers, pappus varius. So that's us. 11A, pappus of the disc flowers partially to wholly of capillary bristles. Again, we didn't see any bristles when we looked at that that pappus. We just saw almost nothing there, and so we get to go to 11B. Pappus of scales or awns or distinctly flattened chafy bristles or a mere crown. So in the examples here that are going to be keyed out, you can see that we have a pappus that is just missing, or if it is there, it's just a little tiny crown or something like that. Okay. In 33A, the question is the pappus none or merely a minute crown or border? Okay. And then 33B is going to say the pappus has long bristles, scales, or awns, at least on the disc flowers. Just to convince ourselves that we're close to where we want to be, let's just take one last look through the magnifying glass. And I apologize if the resolution on this is a bit blurry. Here's our individual disc flowers, some of those just in formation. And on those individual flowers, we don't see any pappus coming up. Look in another dissected head. These ones will be a little further along. Individual disc flowers, some of them quite far along. And again, you can see that developing ovary that's going to develop into an achene at the base. You can see the corolla, but we see no pappus. So 33A is a good choice for us right now. The next choice, 34A and 34B, plants scapos, Philaries herbaceous, the scabrous margin obscure. This is keying out the genus Bellis perennis. So, scapos means that there's no leaves on the stem. What do you think? Absolutely not. This is not a scapos inflorescence. The flower itself doesn't have leaves that are very close by. I had to cut them off here, but in fact the stem has plenty of small leaves on it even before we get to the flower. So we're fine here saying no, it's a leafy stemmed plant, and because that's an absolute choice, we can either read the rest of the couplet or not, and for now we can just go with that. So our Philaries are also have a green center and wide scabrous margins. Okay. Our leaves 1 to 3 pinnately dissected with a linear to filiform segment. That's much like you can see here in the illustration. Or 36B, or I'm sorry, 35B, leaves toothed or once pinnatophyid with a wide rachis, or bipinnately compound with wide flat segments. Well, here are our leaves. These are our leaves on the scape itself. They're merely toothed. They're not completely divided, but they would fall under this heading, leaves toothed. They are not 1 to 3 times pinnately dissected. That's certainly not the case. And of course, towards the base, these leaves can actually look quite different. They can look pretty dissected, but not exactly like that. They, in the past, we've called them, they almost look like jazz hands or something like that. Okay, so we're going to go with 35B, leaves toothed. 37A leaves bipinnately compound with a slender rachis and ovate to elliptic segments. That's nice because we know that our leaves are just toothed or at once pinnatifid, maybe. So we have to go with 37B because we can't go with bipinnately compound. Once again, just to illustrate that one last time, there's our leaf, not bipinnately compound. Our next choice is plants perennial. 1 or more regularly 4 to 15 decameters. That means 40 centimeters to 150 centimeters. That's pretty tall. Involucre 1 to 3.5 centimeters in diameter. The scarious bract margins clear or pale to dark brown, rays 1 to 3 centimeters. So once again, we can measure, here's our dark brown, looks like we have dark brown margins on our involucre here. We can measure the diameter of our involucre there. Make sure it's the right size. And our rays should be 1 to 3 centimeters. So our ray flower should be 1 to 3 centimeters there. And again, we can measure that. Our other option here is plants annual, which doesn't match what we're seeing here. These are probably perennial. They're pretty hardy. It's saying 0.5 to 2.5 decameters, so a shorter plant, shorter than 25 centimeters. Decameter, of course, is 10 centimeters in this case. And in general, we have some of this that's going to work. The scarious bract margins, dark brown to black. We're going to be tempted to go that way. But it still is going to fit within leucanthemum here. Rays 6 to 12 millimeters. So we might kind of like that, but that would be a really small sized plant. And then we have a nice little illustration here of, in this case, this is 38A. You can see the illustration here. The basal leaves should look something like this. Here's our stem, and there's our involucre. And so we could compare that if we wanted to the plant we're holding at hand. And in fact, that's our genus. So we're leucanthemum is where we're at. That's the genus we've keyed out to, and that's going to be our best match. Let's flip to leucanthemum and make sure that's the case. If you made it this far, congratulations. This is Leucanthemum vulgare, otherwise known as oxeye daisy. Always make sure to read the description as closely as you can, and you're lucky here in that in the genus there are no additional species to key out. There's only one species to consider. So go ahead and read through that, make sure it matches the plant that you're actually holding in your hand, which should be oxeye daisy, Leucanthemum vulgare.